The tournament arena was filled to capacity when Sioha stepped onto the combat floor for the semi-final match. Thousands of spectators from dozens of species watched from the observation galleries. Their attention focused on the center of the ring where two competitors would soon face each other. Cyrith entered from the opposite side, moving with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Veluxy champion's six-fingered hands held a competition blade in the perfect standard grip. The same grip their species had developed 4 centuries ago and imposed on the rest of the galaxy. "I almost feel sorry for you," Cyrith announced, loud enough for the nearby spectators to hear. "Your species should have stayed on whatever death world spawned you, instead of pretending to belong among civilized warriors." Sioha said nothing, taking their position on the starting mark with the blade held in the standard grip. The match officials went through their protocols, checking equipment and confirming that both competitors understood the rules. Then, the starting signal sounded. Cyrith attacked immediately, closing the distance with movements that looked almost casual despite their deadly precision. Sia blocked barely, feeling the impact travel up their arm as their standard grip struggled to absorb the force. The Veluxy pressed forward, testing the human's defenses with probing strikes that came from textbook angles. Every attack was exactly what the Academy taught, and every defense Sioha attempted felt inadequate against the species that had written those textbooks. The first point went to Cyrith, then the second. The crowd began to murmur, their expectations confirmed by what they were seeing. Sioha fell back, taking a glancing hit to the shoulder that would count as a 3rd point if it had landed cleanly. Cyrith was playing with them now, showing off for the audience, demonstrating the vast gulf between a champion and a pretender. "Perhaps your species lacks the evolutionary development for proper combat," Cyrith commented, circling slowly. "You certainly lack the fingers for a proper grip." The Veluxy lunged forward with a strike designed to end the match in humiliating fashion. Sioha went down, hitting the floor hard as the blade passed over their head. The crowd assumed it was over. They assumed wrong. Sioha rolled and came up with their blade held differently than before. The weapon now pointed downward from their fist, secured by the thumb against the base of the handle, angled in a way that no Academy textbook had ever shown. The reverse grip, the forbidden technique. Human way. Cyrith paused, confusion visible in their posture. "What is this?" the Veluxy demanded. Some kind of desperate improvisation? The tournament commentators were speaking rapidly in the background, trying to explain what they were seeing. Several of them did not have words for it because it was not in any of the manuals they had studied. "This is how humans hold a blade," Sioha said, and their voice carried clearly through the arena. "This is what 400 years of your optimization never considered." The match resumed. Everything changed. Sioha moved differently now, closing distance instead of retreating, getting inside Cyrith's optimal range, where the standard grip's reach advantage became irrelevant. The first strike came from an angle that the Veluxy's training had not prepared them for. Cyrith blocked it. Barely. The second strike came from a different angle, transitioning from attack to grapple in a motion that flowed naturally from the reverse grip. Cyrith was forced backward, their 6 fingers struggling to adjust to an opponent who was not fighting by the rules they had mastered. "Point to Sioha." The crowd went silent then. Velux's voice cut through from the medical observation deck, cheering despite the pain that must have been shooting through his injured arm. More voices joined him. Cyrith attacked with renewed fury, abandoning the casual confidence of earlier for the focused intensity of someone facing an unexpected challenge. But the Veluxy's counterattacks were designed for opponents using the standard grip. Their defensive patterns optimized against strikes that came from predictable angles. Sia was not predictable. Point to Sioha's score was tied now. Cyrith's movements became desperate, technique degrading as frustration overrode training. 400 years of refined doctrine had not prepared them for an opponent who had thrown away the rules entirely. The The final exchange happened. Almost too fast to follow, Cyrith lunged with a strike that it should have been impossible to block. Given the angles involved, Sioa did not try to block. Instead, they stepped inside the attack, letting the blade pass harmlessly beside them, and delivered a strike of their own that used their body weight exactly the way human anatomy was designed to use it. Point 2. Sio Hamich over the arena sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Then Morel Tavsham began to applaud, her insectoid hands making the sharp clicking sound that was the Oravani equivalent of approval. Others joined her. Applause spread through the galleries like a wave, building from scattered claps into something that shook the walls of the arena. Cyrith stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. A human, using techniques that violated every principle of proper blade work, had just defeated the 3-time tournament champion. Tournament officials huddled together, reviewing footage and consulting rulebooks. After several minutes of heated discussion, they made their announcement. There was no rule mandating grip style. The academy required students to use approved blade types, but nothing in the regulations specified how those blades had to be held. Sioa's victory would stand. Instructor Kethver appeared at the edge of the arena. His administrative duties had apparently concluded at exactly the right moment for him to witness the final verdict. The Dralith instructor said nothing publicly, but as Sioha walked past him, there was a small nod, acknowledgement, respect, permission to continue being different. Months later, a new semester began at the Galactic Defense Academy. Sia sat in the back of the Blade Combat Hall, helping Velix catch up on the coursework he had missed while recovering from his injury. Morel joined them, asking questions about human martial traditions that she had never thought to ask before. At the front of the room, Instructor Kethver began his lecture. Today we will begin an experimental module, the Dralith announced, exploring alternative grip techniques and their applications for different species anatomies. Holographic displays activated around the room, showing not just the standard grip, but variations, adaptations, different approaches for different hands. For too long, this academy has assumed that one method could serve all. Keffer continued, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like freedom. We have learned that assumption was incorrect. His 4 eyes swept across the room, pausing briefly on the human in the back row. Proper grip does not mean the grip that was proper for the Veluxi 4 centuries ago, and it means the grip that is proper for you. Sioha smiled and held their blade the way humans had always been meant to hold it. Sometimes changing the galaxy did not require weapons or wars. Sometimes it just required someone willing to flip the blade. The Inter-Academy tournament transformed Varanto 7 into a spectacle of martial excellence that drew viewers from across the galactic sector. Ships arrived daily, carrying competitors and spectators who wanted to witness the finest blade work in known Spacioa watched from the edges of the preparation area as cadets from a dozen different institutions warmed up for their matches. The Veluxi competitors moved with the fluid grace of a species whose anatomy had shaped 4 centuries of combat doctrine. Their 6-fingered hands held their blades in the standard grip as if they had been born to it, which in a sense they had been. Morel Tavshan dominated her early rounds, defeating opponents from 3 different academies with the precision that had made her the top student in their class. Each victory reinforced the belief that proper form would always triumph over improvisation. Instructor Keffer watched her matches with visible pride, his 4 arms clasped behind his back in the posture of a mentor whose student had exceeded all expectations. Sia competed as required, using the standard grip because they were not ready to reveal what they had been practicing in the midnight hours. Their matches were struggles, close victories that came from determination rather than skill, and the other competitors barely noticed the human who scraped through each round by the narrowest of margins. The Veluxy cadets were particularly dismissive there. Champion was a competitor named Cirith, who had won the tournament 3 years running and showed no signs of slowing down. Cirith moved through the brackets like a force of nature, defeating each opponent with techniques that looked effortless between matches. Cirith made comments that carried across the preparation area. "I see the humans have finally sent someone to compete," Cirith observed loudly after one of Sioa's barely won matches. "Though perhaps compete is too strong a word for what we just witnessed." The other Veluxy laughed, their 6-fingered hands making the gesture of dismissal that was universal among their. King Sioha said nothing. They had learned long ago on Hestia 4 that some battles were won by not fighting, by waiting until a moment was right. The quarterfinal round brought Velix against Cirith, and Sioha watched from the observation deck with growing dread. The Karathi had improved greatly since their first year at the academy, but he was still no match for a 3-time champion whose species had invented the very techniques everyone else was forced to use. The match was brutal. Cirith did not simply defeat Velix, but humiliated him, using advanced techniques that were technically legal but clearly designed to cause maximum pain when the final point was scored. Cirith continued pressing the attack for several seconds, longer than necessary. Velix's arm took a hit that would have been disqualifying in a real combat situation, a strike to the joint that sent the Karathi tumbling to the ground with a cry of pain. The officials reviewed the footage and ruled it legal. Technically, they were correct. The strike had occurred within the allowed time frame by a margin of less than half a second, but everyone watching knew what Cirith had done and why. Sioha visited the medical bay where Velix lay with his arm immobilized by healing equipment. "You should not be here," Velix said when he saw the human enter. "You have a match to prepare for. The brackets put me against Cirith in the semifinals," Sioha replied, sitting down beside the Karathi's bed. "If I win my next match, which everyone assumes I will lose," Velix made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not carried so much pain. "Then lose," he said. "There is no shame in avoiding a battle you cannot win." Sioha looked at the Karathi's injured arm, at the damage Cirith had inflicted, because winning was not enough, because making others suffer was part of the victory. "I do not intend to lose," Sioha said quietly. Velix's vertical pupils widened. "You have been practicing something different," he said. "I have heard you at night for months now, and whatever it is you have learned, this might be the time to show it." The next match was against a Drelmari cadet whose blade work was solid but uninspired Sioha when using the standard grip, saving their energy for what was to come. The semifinal bracket was set: human versus Velux is struggling, cadet versus undefeated champion. The outcome seemed so certain that some spectators did not even bother watching the preliminary matches that day. That night, after the lights had dimmed and most of the station had gone to sleep, there was a knock at Sioha's door. Instructor Kethver stood in the hallway, his forearms arranged in a posture Sioha had never seen before. "May I enter?" he asked. Sioha stepped aside, confusion mixing with anxiety as the Drelith instructor walked into the small quarters. Kethver looked around the room, his gaze settling on the utility knife that Sioha had accidentally left sitting on the desk in the forbidden grip position. "I have known about your midnight practice sessions for some time," Kethver said. Sioha felt their blood run cold. "I came to tell you that I have administrative duties tomorrow that will prevent me from attending your match against Cirith." The instructor continued, as if discussing the weather. "It is most unfortunate timing, but paperwork waits for no one." The Drowlith moved toward the door, then paused. "When I was young, I had an unconventional technique of my own, one that used my species' 4 arms in ways the standard doctrine did not anticipate." His voice carried something that sounded almost like regret. "I abandoned it to advance through the Academy's ranks, and sometimes I wonder what I might have achieved if I had found the courage to be different. He left without another word. Sioha stood alone in the silence, understanding what Kethver had just given them permission. In the only way an instructor bound by 4 centuries of tradition could give it an hour later. Morel appeared at the door. "I have been thinking about what you showed me," she said. "About the research you found and the techniques you have developed. And I believe I would like to understand them better." "Why?" Sioha asked. Morel's compound eyes reflected the dim light of the corridor. "Because tomorrow you are going to fight Cirith. And I want to know what I will be watching when you do." They spent the rest of the night in the training hall, Human and Oravani working together across the gulf of their differences by dawn. Morel had not mastered the reverse grip, but she understood it, and understanding, Sioha knew, was the first step toward change. The empty training hall became Sioha's secret classroom in the hours after midnight, when the other cadets slept and the automated monitoring systems cycled into low power mode. They moved through the shadows with their blade held in the grip that the Academy called wrong, the grip that humans called the reverse hold, or sometimes the ice pick grip. It felt like coming home. The downward angle of the blade opened up possibilities that the standard grip denied. Sioha could strike and then immediately transition into a grapple without repositioning their hand. They could use their body weight to add power to their attacks in ways that felt instinctive rather than forced. Most importantly, the grip worked with human anatomy instead of against it. Night after night, they practiced, developing techniques that no Academy manual had ever described. Some of them came from memories of self-defense training on Hestia 4, where the mining colony had taught every child how to protect themselves from the dangerous wildlife that roamed the planet's surface. Other techniques emerged naturally as Sioha explored what their body could do when it was not being forced into positions designed for alien hands. The pace disadvantages were real. Reach was reduced, meaning they had to get closer to an opponent before they could strike. The defensive angles were different, requiring new footwork patterns that the Academy had never taught. But as the weeks passed, Sioha began to understand how to compensate for these weaknesses. They were so focused on their practice one night that they did not hear the door open. "What in the name of the founding council are you doing?" Morel Tavshan stood in the doorway, her compound eyes glittering in the dim light. Sioha froze, blade still held in the forbidden position. "I can explain." They began. "You are violating training protocols," Morel interrupted, her wings twitching with agitation. "The grip you are using has been explicitly rejected by 4 centuries of Academy doctrine. And if I report this, you will be expelled." Sioha lowered the blade, but did not flip it back to the standard position. Something in them refused to hide anymore. "At least not from this." "Then report me," they said quietly. "But first let me show you something." Morel hesitated, curiosity apparently warring with her instinct for rule following. "Show me what?" Sioha demonstrated a simple sequence, moving through attack and defense patterns that flowed naturally from the reverse grip. They showed how the blade could be concealed against the forearm, how strikes could come from unexpected angles, how the grip allowed for seamless transitions between armed and unarmed combat. When they finished, Morel was silent for a long moment. "That was..." She paused, searching for words. "Not entirely without merit. It works with human hands," Sioha explained. "The standard grip was designed for different anatomy, for species with longer fingers and different joint structures. And for humans it will never feel natural, because it was never meant for us." "You sound very certain of that," Morel observed. "I did some research," Sioha admitted. "In the Academy archives?" The research had taken several nights of careful searching through historical records that most cadets never bothered to access. What Sioha had found there had changed everything. They thought they knew about the standard grip, The academy was founded by the Veluxi, they told Morel, a species with 6 fingers and double-jointed thumbs. And they developed a standard grip for their own anatomy. Before anyone else joined the institution, Morel's wings went still. Continue. When other species started attending the academy, the Veluxi were in charge of the curriculum, and they taught their grip as if it were universal truth rather than species-specific technique. Sioha pulled out the datapad where they had stored copies of the historical documents. Some species adapted well because their hands happened to be similar enough to Veluxi hands. But others struggled for generations before their blade work reached acceptable levels. The Karathi, Morel said slowly, understanding dawning in her voice, and the Drelmari and the Oskvin and half a dozen other species, whose natural combat styles were actually superior to what the academy taught, but who abandoned their own techniques because they were told the Veluxi way was the only way. The documents showed records of blade combat tournaments from before the academy's founding. Some species had won consistently with techniques that looked nothing like the standard grip after joining the academy. Their performance had actually declined for several generations before they adapted enough to compete again. Morel stopped, her analytical mind clearly processing the implications. This is a significant institutional failure if what you are saying is accurate. It is not a failure, Sioha replied. It is an assumption that became tradition that became law. And no one questioned it because questioning the academy is not something cadets are encouraged to do. Morel stood in silence, her compound eyes fixed on the datapad in Sioha's hand. Finally, she looked up at the human who had just turned everything she believed about the academy upside down. I will not report you, she said. Not because I agree with your conclusions, but because I believe in evidence. And I would like to see more of it before I make a judgment. It was not friendship, but it was something better. It was the beginning of doubt in a mind that had never doubted before. The next morning brought news that changed everything. The annual Inter-Academy tournament would be held on Varantho 7 this year, and the Academy's top cadets would compete against students from allied military institutions across the sector. Instructor Kethver expected Morel to bring honor to their school. No one expected anything from the human who could barely hold a blade properly, but Sioha had stopped caring about expectations. They had found something more important in those midnight training sessions, something that felt like truth now. They just needed the courage to show it to the rest of the galaxy. 1 month passed at the Galactic Defense Academy, and with it came the first practical assessment that every cadet had been dreading since enrollment. The combat evaluation chamber was a massive circular arena filled with obstacles, targets, and automated systems designed to test everything the students had learned. Sioha stood in line with the other cadets, watching through the observation window as their classmates took their turns one by one. Morel Tavshon went early in the rotation, and she moved through the course like water flowing downhill. Her blade work was flawless, every strike landing exactly where the Academy manual said it should. Every defensive motion executed with the precision that made her species legendary. When she finished, the scoreboard displayed numbers that broke the existing course record. That is what dedication to proper form achieves. Instructor Kethver announced to the assembled cadets, "Let Cadet Tavshan's performance serve as inspiration to those of you who have struggled with the fundamentals." Sioha felt the instructor's secondary eyes glance in their direction, but pretended not to notice. Evelix took his turn next. Moving through the course with obvious effort, his Karathi body was built for power rather than speed, and the standard grip looked awkward in his scaled hands even after a month of constant practice. But he passed, finishing in the middle of the rankings. Where most cadets clustered, then it was Sioha's turn. They stepped into the arena and felt the weight of every eye in the observation gallery pressing down on them. The Starting signal sounded, and they moved. The first obstacle was a series of hanging targets that required quick, directional changes between strike. Seoha's grip slipped on the second target, and they had to adjust mid-swing, losing precious seconds. The second section involved defensive work against automated training drones that attacked from multiple angles. Here, the standard grip should have provided the protection the Academy promised. But Seoha found themselves constantly fighting their own instincts. Their body wanted to move in ways the grip did not allow. By the time they reached the final section, their ranking was already hovering near the bottom of the class. They finished the course without failing outright. But the numbers on the scoreboard told a story of struggle and near collapse after the other cadets had dispersed. Ketfer called Seoha into his private office. The room was decorated with weapons from a dozen different worlds, all of them displayed in the standard grip position, as if to reinforce the lesson that the instructor was about to deliver. Cadet Yun, Ketfer began, settling his forearms into a posture that somehow managed to look both formal and sympathetic. Your performance in tactical studies has been excellent, and your survival training scores are among the highest in your class. Thank you, instructor, Seoha replied, sensing the word that was coming. But your blade work is not meeting the standards this academy requires. Ketfer continued. I do not say this to be cruel, and I say it because I have seen many cadets over my centuries of teaching, and I have learned to recognize when someone is fighting against their own nature. He paused, allowing the silence to stretch. Perhaps you should consider transferring to the support division, where your tactical mind would be better utilized, and where the physical demands would not work against your species' natural limitations. The words hit Seoha like a blow to the chest. Transfer to support meant giving up on everything they had come here to achieve. It meant proving morale right, proving that humans were not ready for the academy, proving that their species was somehow lesser than the others who had adapted to the standard grip over generations. I request permission to continue, instructor, Seoha said, keeping their voice steady through sheer force of will. Ketfer studied them for a long moment with all four of his eyes. Very well, he said finally. But understand that the final assessment will not show the same mercy this evaluation has shown. And if your blade work does not improve significantly, you will not pass this course. Seoha left the office with those words burning in their mind. They walked to the medical bay where Velix was getting treatment for a minor cut he had received during his own assessment. The Karathi looked up as Seoha entered, his vertical pupils widening in recognition. You survived the meeting with Ketfer, Velix observed. I take it from your expression that it did not go well. He suggested I transfer to support, Seoha admitted, sitting down on one of the empty beds. Velix said, nodding slowly. He suggested the same to me during my first year, and I refused, though sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. He held up his bandaged hand with a rueful expression. The standard grip still does not feel natural to me. Not even after all this time. Seoha looked at their own hands, at the short fingers and wide palms that seemed so wrong for the techniques the academy demanded. Why do you keep trying? They asked. Because I want to be a warrior, Velix replied simply. The same reason you keep trying, I assume. He tilted his head, studying Seoha with an intensity that felt uncomfortable. But I wonder sometimes if there is another way. A way that does not require us to become something we are not. The Academy's techniques have been refined for 400 years, Seoha said, repeating the words they had heard so many times. Yes, that is what they tell us, Velix agreed. But my people have a saying, the river that refuses to bend around stone will never reach the sea. He stood up, testing his injured hand with careful movements. I have watched you practice at night, Cadet Yun, and I have seen you hold that utility knife of yours in a grip that looks nothing like what Ketfer teaches. And in those moments, you move like water around stone. Sioha felt their face flush with embarrassment. That grip is wrong, they insisted. Everything the Academy teaches says it is wrong. Perhaps, Valak said, moving toward the door. Or perhaps wrong is just a word we use for things we do not understand yet. He left Sioha alone with those words and with the questions they raised that night. Sleep would not come. Sioha lay on their platform, staring at the ceiling and thinking about rivers and stones in the grip that felt natural, even though everyone said it was a mistake. They pulled out the utility knife again and held it in the dark, the blade pointed downward, secure and ready, an extension of their arm rather than an awkward addition to their hand. Wrong, the word echoed in their mind. But for the first time, it sounded less like a fact and more like an opinion and opinions. Sioha knew from growing up on a mining colony where survival meant questioning everything could be changed. The Blade Combat Hall of the Galactic Defense Academy stretched out like a cathedral of war, its walls lined with holographic displays that showed 400 years of perfected technique. And Sioha stood at the back of the formation, watching instructor Kethfer demonstrate the grip that every cadet was expected to master before they could call themselves warriors. The Dralith instructor moved with the grace of someone who had spent centuries teaching the art of the blade, his forearms working in perfect coordination as he showed the proper way to hold a combat knife, the thumb braces against the spine of the blade. Kethfer announced, his voice carrying through the hall without effort. The fingers wrap in sequence from index to smallest, creating a secure channel that allows for both control and flexibility. Sioha watched carefully, trying to memorize every detail. Around them stood cadets from 12 different species, all of them focused on the instructor with varying degrees of attention. Morel Tavshan, an Oravani with iridescent wings folded tight against her back, held her blade with mechanical precision that made Sioha feel clumsy. Just watching her insectoid species was known throughout the galaxy for their exact movements and perfect memory. She had already mastered the grip on her first day. This technique has been refined over 4 centuries. Kethfer continued, moving through the ranks of students. It represents the accumulated wisdom of thousands of warriors who came before you, and it has been mathematically optimized for reach, defensive capability, and striking power. When the instructor reached Sioha, he paused, his secondary arms folded behind his back while his primary hands adjusted the human's grip with surprising gentleness. Your thumb is too far forward, he said, and your smallest finger is not engaging properly with the handle. Sioha tried to adjust, feeling the awkwardness in their joints as they forced their hand into the required position. Something about it felt wrong, like trying to write with the opposite hand. Better, Kethfer said, though his tone suggested it was not much better at all. The instructor moved on, leaving Sioha to struggle with a grip that made their wrist ache after only a few minutes of holding it. By the end of the first training session, Sioha's hand was cramping badly. They shook it out as the other cadets filed toward the equipment racks to return their practice blades. Having trouble already? The voice belonged to Morel, who had appeared beside Sioha. Without making a sound, her compound eyes reflected the light of the holographic displays, making it impossible to read her expression. The grip takes time to learn, Sioha replied, trying to keep their voice neutral. For some species, perhaps, Morel said, and there was something in her tone that sounded almost like pity. The Oravani adapted to it within a single generation when we joined the academy. But our joints are more flexible than most. She paused, tilting her head in that way her species did when considering something unpleasant. I mean no offense, but perhaps humans were admitted to the academy before your species was truly ready. And this difficulty you are experiencing may be evidence of that. Sioha felt heat rise to their face, but said nothing. What? Could they say when their trembling hands seemed to prove Morel's point? The Oravani cadet walked away, leaving Seoha alone in the vast hall. The holographic displays cycled through their endless demonstrations of perfect form, perfect grip, perfect strikes delivered by perfect warriors who had mastered the techniques that Seoha could barely hold for 5 minutes that night. Seoha returned to the training hall after the other cadets had gone to sleep. The lights were dimmed to their nighttime setting, casting long shadows across the polished floor. They retrieved a practice blade from the rack and stood in the center of the room, trying again and again to make the standard grip feel natural. It never did. Their fingers were too short relative to their palm width. Or so Seoha had concluded after hours of quiet study. Human hands had evolved for different purposes than the hands of the species that had designed this grip. They were built for endurance tasks, for tool use that required strength rather than elegance, for climbing and grasping and holding on when everything tried to shake them loose. None of that mattered here. What mattered was the Academy standard grip. The same grip that had produced champions and legends. The same grip that was taught to every cadet regardless of their biology. Seoha practiced until their hand went numb, then switched to their other hand and practiced some more. When exhaustion finally drove them back to the barracks, they passed by the quarters of Cadet Own Velix, a Karathi whose door was still showing a sliver of light. The reptilian cadet was awake, sitting on the edge of his sleeping platform with a practice blade in his scaled hands. He looked up when Seoha paused at the doorway. "You are not the only one who struggles," Velix said quietly, his voice carrying the slight hiss that was characteristic of his species. "The standard grip does not suit the Karathi hand any better than it suits yours." Seoha nodded, grateful for the acknowledgement, even if it changed nothing. "How do you manage it?" "I practice until my muscles remember what my instincts reject," Velix replied. "It is the only way." He held up his blade, showing a grip that looked correct to Seoha's eyes but clearly caused him discomfort. The Academy has 400 years of wisdom behind its methods, and who are we to question such things? Seoha returned to their own quarters with those words echoing in their mind. Who were they to question 4 centuries of refined technique? They were nobody, just one of 3 humans ever admitted to this institution, a representative of a species that had only recently joined the galactic community. Their colony on the mining world of HFY 4 had taught them to survive, to adapt, to make do with whatever tools were available. None of those lessons seemed to apply here. Here there was only one way to hold a blade, and that way had been decided long before humanity ever looked up at the stars. Seoha sat on their sleeping platform and pulled out the small utility knife they had brought from home. It was nothing special, just a simple tool that every miner on HFY 4 carried for cutting rope and prying open stuck containers. Without thinking, they held it the way they always had, the blade pointed downward from their fist, secured by their thumb against the base of the handle, ready to strike or cut with a motion that felt as natural as breathing. This was wrong. Everything the Academy taught said this was wrong. The grip reduced reach, compromised defensive angles, made it impossible to execute the standard striking patterns that Kethver demonstrated with such fluid. Seoha stared at the knife in their hand, feeling the rightness of it even as their mind insisted it was a mistake. They flipped the blade around to the standard position, felt the immediate wrongness return, and then unconsciously flipped it back 3 times. They did this before they caught themselves. The Academy way was the only way. 400 years of refinement could not be wrong. Seoha forced their hand into the standard grip and held it there until the ache returned, punishing themselves for the moment of weakness. But as they finally lay down to sleep, they could not stop thinking about how natural the other grip had felt. They could not stop wondering if maybe, just maybe, The wisdom of 400 years had been designed for hands that were not human.